The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Wrestling is Real podcast, because wrestling needs us. It was going to be impossible to wait till Wednesday to talk about the NXT releases and what all the other underlying news and notes that are coming out of this weekend are going to create to what is NXT, because NXT is going to transform, and I'm basically saying it's going to start over again. And so that's the focus of the program tonight. Even playing the Coheed and Cambria music, which the opener I used to love watching NXT back in 2012, 2013 leading up, because those initial years after the competition era, when they opened up the Full Sail Arena, and I'm telling you, that time was magical. You got to go back and look at really just the advent of all the great talent that came from it. From Paige, Sasha Banks, Alexa Bliss, Charlotte Flair, Becky Lynch, Bayley. Like, what a lineup they had over there. And then you go ahead and bring over, on the men's side, Corey Graves doing announcing and seeing, the Wyatt family, the Shield, and all the members in between that. And just an amazing time. And because of the fact that they were able to pull off some amazing takeover events. Even if you have to go look back at the original NXT takeover, the first one that they did, and you look at what they did over all of this, in all this time, I have not taken time to go back to all of what they've done initially, but you go back to what they've done, and just the level of the events they've done have been wonderful. I remember watching NXT Arrival when they first came out. 2014, that event. And then the takeover events came after that. But in the beginning, just remember what they had on that initial show. Cesaro against Sami Zayn. Mojo Rawley, CJ Parker, but that was Mojo Rawley and Juice Robinson now today. The Ascension versus Too Cool. Paige versus Emma. God, man. And Emma now to Neil Dashwood over at Impact Wrestling. A lot of stars that are still somewhere else, but also quite a few that are here. Tyler Breeze and Xavier Woods at the time. So pre a New Day Xavier Woods. Adrian Neville and Bo Dallas. That was the initial event. And of course we know as Pac. And Bo Dallas we have not seen since. But at the time, what an amazing lineup of stars that they had, and what they were able to do from all that was going on. And it was just wonderful. Then we go back to that initial takeover event, May 29th, 2014. And just go back and just look at the level of stars that they had. The three major matches that were put up, and this was Full Sail Arena, by the way, the first takeover. Tyson Kidd versus Adrian Neville. Sami Zayn versus Tyler Breeze. Charlotte versus Natalya for the women's title. And I remember Charlotte and Natalya was a fantastic match with Ric Flair in Charlotte's corner and Bret Hart in Natalya's corner. Shit. Those were just massive. And then you go after that, and you look at the matches they had. When you look back at all the matches they had that led up to so many different things. Revolution. You have Adrian Neville versus Sami Zayn, title versus career match. Rival, Sami Zayn versus Kevin Owens. And then they also did the next pay-per-view, which was Unstoppable. Then the Brooklyn pay-per-view in 2014 in the Barclays Center when the first opened. Finn Balor and Kevin Owens in a ladder match for the NXT title. The 30-minute Iron Woman match at Respect in 2015. Just, man, and then you remember Shinsuke Nakamura and the level of matches he had at every pay-per-view going on. And then the current crop that we have when it comes to Johnny Gargano, Tommaso Ciampa, because that group basically started going back to 2017. Because then when you look at what we were doing with things that were changing, it was about 5 years ago where ultimately the feel of NXT really changed. Because that's where I felt that the turn was made. Because of the popularity that they had with everything that we're doing. Eventually, NXT got to be a certain brand where, it was on the WWE Network. It was very prominent. People were watching it Wednesday nights. It was just must see. It was one of the reasons I absolutely did watch the WWE Network besides the pay-per-views, that I bought it initially when it first came out. It was a draw. It's one of the highest rated shows on the network as well. I think WWE wants to get back to that again. But they can't do it with the current crop of wrestlers now. And you got to ask yourself why. And I think what it is, there was a change of bringing in talent and not taking, and it really was when there was a need for new talent. I mean, really, the mid-2010s, you definitely felt there was a change in what was being done in terms of the talent, where you had all those stars that moved over, that exodus of stars that got moved over to the main roster. Everybody at that point, because of a couple of years of such popularity that NXT had, that WWE was in need of stars, and he absolutely had to go and take advantage. And so they did. Bayley, Sasha, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, Finn Balor, Samoa Joe, Shinsuke Nakamura. Like, there was just so much talent there that they had to move up. And then Adrian Neville became Neville. Sami Zayn, like I said, there's just so many there that they had to eventually just move up to the main roster, and that whole roster replenished. It couldn't get replenished. And then they tried to go and stay with some of the younger stars that they had, but there's so many green stars that they had, just so new to the game. And not new to the game so much, but it was just so much that was going on that all they could do was, well, they had to go and just bring in some other stars that can come and fill the void. When they tapped the NXT roster, and they just really purged it. They took as many stars as they could because they needed it for the main roster, and they put them out there. And the ones that didn't work out well, the Ascension or Adam Rose, or, eventually Tyler Breeze and Fandango made their way up. But even that didn't necessarily get all the way through. I mean, you saw some flashes from it, but they took the gimmicks as they were and brought them up. And people were just kind of used to saying, okay, well, NXT is the home for the call-up. They're the minor leagues. They're not just developmental territory. They are now a minor league system to pull to the main roster. And they did that for a while. But then the stars that they had to go and pull from, they decided not to go so much with the talent from the Performance Center that was not turning out well, because they needed some stars to come in and fill the void right away. And that's when they started going for the Ring of Honor talent. That's when they started looking in Japan. They started looking in the UK. And they started pulling stars. And they started pulling their weight to try to get stars they could bring on over for various projects. They would start up 205 Live. They would have a main event. They would have, NXT UK. They would bring up later on after that. And now they have all these stars. Like NXT UK, we don't even know what's going to happen to that yet. We have no clue what they're going to do with that division yet. They could very well take some of those stars in the UK and then just combine them to NXT now and bring them over. Instead of having them over, I don't know what they would do. I don't know how they would make it work. But eventually, they're going to have to figure something out. Maybe it's when the UK stars are going to have to make their way over some way, somehow, over here and work and get their visas in order and get themselves ready to go and work over here to fill the roster if they need some help on the roster now. But at this point, going back to the history of NXT, you remember, that's what brought us to where the current incarnation of NXT is today. Because they had to go ahead and make do. So they saw a Ring of Honor roster that was jam-packed with talent. And they tapped into it. And they purged that roster. 2013, 2014, 2015. There was a lot of stars that got brought in. And when Ring of Honor was working well with New Japan Pro Wrestling, and they were in a hot point, at one of their higher points of their career, of the history of the organization, of the promotion, and it was working well. And then they made this change. And then that's when you see even more on a regular basis stars that would make their way over from Ring of Honor because they were getting signed away. Like, it wasn't that we're getting released by Ring of Honor and then moved over. No, at that point, the next step for some of these Ring of Honor stars was to go to WWE, but go by way of NXT. And they did. And there's some that have been successful at that. But just look at the amount of stars they brought over. So many. What are you going to do? And so they did this and made it the point, and why not? But that was a change that, you know, it could be effective in working, but they still needed to get some organic stars. They needed to bring some stars that were grassroots, that were not veterans from other organizations, that were not of the creation of Vince McMahon. For those of you who might be too young to remember this, but when WCW was folded, and ECW folded as well in 2001, we did have the invasion angle, so a lot of stars didn't get to come over, and in about 6 months, that whole invasion angle failed. Because the company was never that good at taking talents from other organizations and really making something out of them. Out of the WCW talent, it took a while to get a Booker T off the ground. They tried Dallas Page, and that was short-lived, and I mean, it could have been better. And then you think about, they never had Sting. They got Ric Flair to come over, but he had already been over before. And of course, there's some others we could think about. But on the ECW side, you know, Tommy Dreamer would make his way over, and then the ECW brand was reborn, which is when I had taken time off to not watch wrestling for a while. Like for a few years, I got back into it once ECW came back. There's a lot of stars I was going to watch over there and I wanted to watch. It was like, that was my way of getting back in. And for some people, NXT feels like the same thing because they get a little bit tired of how the main roster is treated and how they do things and who's getting pushed up and who shouldn't. And so for some people, especially some diehard fans, they have used NXT as a gateway for them to still stay in touch with WWE and to give people a reason to go and stay on to watch because hopefully one of their NXT favorites will get called up. Of the current crop of NXT talent, they have made some changes where they brought them up. And we've seen them come up in droves. Remember when Lacey Evans and EC3 and the War Raiders all came up? Lars Sullivan doing it. Does anyone remember him? Like all these people that got brought up in one shot and, you know, didn't pan so well. Aleister Black and Ricochet, all in the same shot. Johnny Gargano as well. Tommaso Ciampa also got brought up, and then they pulled them back down. And you look at the current crop with Damian Priest and Riddle, and Keith Lee, and Karrion Kross. And some of that probably got done hesitantly or kind of quickly because they were trying to get things going to, you know, because of this plan that was being initiated now. What needs to be understood is that what's happening now is the changes being made. Everybody right now in podcasting, I've been listening to quite a bit of shows this weekend. And since Friday night, I've been listening. And all I know is everybody's talking about the releases themselves and trying to just basically say NXT's dead. It's not. But we need to understand a number of things. And I want to stay voice of reason here. Some of you fans will not like what I'm saying. But it's a harsh truth. And I will explain why I think what I'm thinking. The show's name is Wrestling is Real. And Wrestling is Real means you need to look at the realistic consequences of what WWE is making with an open mind. And separate the signal, which is the reasons they're doing this, and what is the overlying strategy they're going with. The battle plan. From the noise, which is, you know, frustration, anger, vitriol, betrayal of NXT and the current incarnation. And, I'm not going to watch the WWE anymore. Cancel NXT, cancel the WWE, right? They're all going to do that again. Got it. And so everybody's doing that again. I'm hearing that right now, It's not my problem if somebody wants to do that. Go right ahead. People getting very easily sensitive and just kind of just bailing out because they just want to bail out. It's like that's like the in thing to do. I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. Signal from the noise. So the noise is this. This is what the news that came out that got everybody stirred up. The initial list of stars from NXT that might have been, featured on the program or not, or might have been Performance Center talent, the following were released. Bobby Fish, Bronson Reed, Jake Atlas, Ari Sterling, Kona Reeves, Leon Ruff, Stefan Smith, Tyler Rust, Zechariah Smith, Asher Hale, Giant Gingier, and Mercedes Martinez. Every podcaster, every analyst, every TikToker out there that I've been watching, they're all going through chapter and verse with each star, where they can be going, why did they do this, why am I so shocked that Bronson Reed and Mercedes Martinez are taking off. That's not the problem. Now, I'm going to at least overall say this shit sucks for all these stars, but what they have to take away from this is the fact that the exposure of being on NXT, fans are going to be following where they're going to go next. Just like all the other releases that have happened this year. What have been about over 40? There's been some major overhaul, like a real overhaul of talent. And what I felt like happened this weekend was the part of a plan, which I don't know when it actually was probably brought to light. Like, this is all speculating. But, of course, when they started making the changes to the digital media team, post-WrestleMania, making the releases, and then more after that. And then, some of the consolidation that they did, and some of the hires that were brought on, that Nick Khan brought on from some of his CEA allies being brought into the mix. Like, all that brought into play. And then the preparation for the live shows coming back. And everything being brought into play, what were they going to do to work things together and get things right? And so this is obviously a plan. Now, unlike Creative that doesn't know how to plan, the company knows how to plan. And they made a plan, regardless of, the way the talent found out and this, backhanded, let's go ahead and drop the news Friday night when nobody's paying attention. Yeah, we know. I know what you're trying to do. It's like the traditional, you want to get bad news out there, you drop it at Friday at 5 o'clock, a press release, and nobody knows what's going on because everybody else is kind of just taking the weekend off. And that's what they do. But a number of wrestling sites and people were following along. They knew what was happening. And you just can't sneak something like this past the internet wrestling community. It doesn't happen. Can't be possible. So they did it. The strategy is that I think that, and this is something I said on one of my TikTok videos commenting about this, because I tried to do just a couple of TikToks just to make some comments, but this wasn't going to be enough. This is the way I look at it. The fact that if you look at the current NXT format, now they've been running takeovers from Capitol Wrestling Center, or before that, they hadn't run any shows anywhere else. But then if we know there were a lot of changes where a lot of NXT stars got moved over during the pandemic. The last NXT takeover was Portland, and that was February 2020. And it was at the time, as we learned during a post-takeover conference call, is that it was a long-standing WWE record in the state of Oregon for that show. The highest grossing in Oregon since 2008's No Mercy pay-per-view. But now, February 2020, and you look at the card that they had that night, Keith Lee against Dominic Dijakovic to start. Dakota Kai versus Tegan Knox in a street fight. Finn Balor versus Johnny Gargano. Rhea Ripley against Bianca Belair. The Broserweights against the Undisputed Era. And then Adam Cole and Tommaso Ciampa. And that did get a full crowd. So they're able to get to that point. And, you know, that's a pretty good crowd to have now. That was a pretty good show they had for that event. But there have been quite a few changes they've made to what they've been doing lately. And the last show that they did recently was a In Your House, which was a takeover. That show did have Saraya and Zoe Stark against the Robert Stone brand, Bronson Reed, MSK against Legado del Fantasma, Zia Lee versus Mercedes Martinez, LA Knight versus Cameron Grimes, Raquel Gonzalez versus Ember Moon, and Karrion Kross versus Kyle O'Reilly, Adam Cole, Johnny Gargano, and Pete Dunne. Would that show have pulled 10,000 fans, 15,000 fans? Quick question. In that show, we know it was a good show, but are you saying that Karrion Kross against, you know, Adam Cole, obviously, we know is pretty much a draw. Johnny Gargano gets quite a bit of a praise. He's been on the roster for a long time. Kyle O'Reilly as well. And Pete Dunne to a point. Raquel Gonzalez as the NXT Women's Champion. And are you saying that Bronson Reed and MSK and Legado del Fantasma, was that going to be enough to pull that big crowd? Because I think that's what's happening there. Because what we also have seen as well have been how the ratings have not done well overall for what they've been doing. If I want to go back and look at the ratings, we can look back at what they were doing. We couldn't see what the network was doing. We know it was doing well, but we never got to see what the ratings looked like beforehand. But we do know that the NXT has been suffering as of late. Prior, well, really just during the run being on USC Network, of course they started off uncontested to a good start. And they stayed pretty consistently competitive with what they were doing with AEW and Dynamite. So we looked back at 2019. And the last point where that crowd was really pretty hot. At the end of 2019, the show is pulling, as soon as Dynamite came on, you know, they started getting settled in, and you would see a couple of times where they would get 900,000 viewers. So between 800 and 900,000 viewers at that time, September, or actually October, November, December 2019. Now, do we want to go ahead and say there might have been something to be said about how the ratings changed going into 2020? I guess we could say that. If I look at 2020's ratings and look at NXT, through 2020, before the pandemic, they were pulling still well over 700,000 viewers across the board. And then the pandemic hit, and then that's when we had the changes that we had. And then things at right around WrestleMania time, when they had made changes around, the ratings started to suffer. So I think there was a point that used to have, you know, they were getting under 700,000 viewers, and then things were happening where Dynamite started taking the spot. Now, since the show has gone back to their own lineup in 2021, since the show's gone back in April, back to their own time slot again. There's been a bit of a difference. Like the first time they came back, 800,000 viewers for the first week. going uncontested, 841,000, and then the first couple of weeks, of course, they hotshot booked those shows, and then it came down. And it was on a bit of a decline ever since, because they were under 600,000, under 700,000 viewers from around Memorial Day weekend all the way up to July 4th. You could say it's a dead time, whatever. And they were still kind of working on building some stars up, because they had quite a few stars that were pulled over to the main roster, called over. Sure, you could say that. And then prior to coming back, well, prior to after July 4th, they had a couple of shows in July, right before Olympics time, where they did get over 700,000 viewers, but they had to do quite a bit to try to keep those numbers up. But I think the company believes that they're not able to pull the gate that they would be getting back in February, because a number of the stars they had there have moved over. I think they also think that there's return on investment. There's a question about the return on investment. Any good financial person, anybody that knows how to make money, it's not a lesson you guys have to learn as well, is that you make a business happen. It's not the core of your business, but any good corporation, they're going to try to figure out if all their sectors are performing at their best. NXT was underperforming. One of the things that helped them out was, and it wasn't anything else, it wasn't so much about NXT where, I mean, NXT was doing well enough to get a USA Network deal. But the USA Network deal only was done because I think WWE was trying to go and pitch NXT to USA Network to go ahead and counteract AEW. So NXT was thrown to the wolves. The decision to do that, I thought NXT would suffer as a result, and it did. But was the decision smart on the company? Probably. If they wanted to go and throw a roadblock by using NXT to roadblock Dynamite's ratings, it did somewhat work, because AEW wasn't able to pull millions of viewers until now. I mean, it took a while for them to kind of start making their way back, but ever since things changed, when Dynamite was uncontested, they pulled several times 1 million viewers, and then it would drop under 1 million viewers a couple of times, but the numbers had gotten better. And now, after July 4th, whatever happened, even after the Olympic coverage, it came back, and now it's up. And whatever happened, Dynamite right now is kicking on their cylinders. 1.0 to 1.1 million viewers now, consistently 5 weeks straight. So NXT was serving a purpose for WWE, because if it's not, they allowed that to be a casualty. They didn't mind putting it out there to slaughter, because it wasn't pulling any money of its own. How much was it pulling in merchandise? How much was it pulling in, because they couldn't do shows. But even when they go ahead and set up right now live shows, the NXT stars are not going out on the road. And they have not started back up the NXT shows, at the least running them in local Florida cities, where they would always run in Fort Pierce or Tampa or Orlando. And they would start running shows that were basically for the Performance Center talent to get their sea legs wet. But they haven't done that yet. And we don't know what's going to happen with that in the first place. I'm not sure. So NXT's at this point. And now, what are they going to do next? One of the things that you did with AEW in the first place, when you competed, the other thing was being done strategically by WWE was also try to sign as much talent as they could that could not go to AEW. And they did that for a while as a strategy. But Nick Khan is now there, Chief Revenue Officer. He looks at all this, the books of talent, and seeing all these contracts here and asking, okay, unfortunately, looking at every marker, every wrestler as a marker and saying, okay, let's talk about Bronson Reed. Okay, we've had him here for, about a year, right? More than that? What's the chance he's going to return on investment? Adam Cole, we're going to come up to a contract with him now. He's expired. We could offer a deal with him because I think there's probably an upside to him. He can still continue to bolster NXT as we rebuild NXT because that's what they're going to do. NXT is being rebuilt and reprogrammed, reformatted. So there was wrestlers that don't have a return on investment. And there's probably the belief that some of the stars they had here, for whatever reason, Bronson Reed was part of that conversation. And Mercedes Martinez, they thought, well, it's not worth having their contracts way up on us. Let them go. The other thing I think you have to talk about as well is since the NXT, say 2012, the debut of the current format of NXT, the black and gold, the rock, the metal sound, the entrances of all the stars, and having just like this rock metal kind of thing for the bulk of all of their characters, and the broodness and the darkness of all their characters as well. Because they're all consistently, that's just like wrestling fans kind of always have the thing, always wearing black t-shirts, kind of the attitude idea as well. A lot of black t-shirts, a lot of, older fans that might still be very much into the rock of the 90s, 2000s, 80s, whatever. Pick whatever they want. And then you have a lot of these stars coming out to entrance music that is rock oriented. When in the 2020s, rock, we're trying to see a little bit of a resurgence, but in the last 2 decades, rock has been kind of irrelevant. Now, I know the music can be said, it's like, it's an underground feel to it, right? But everything rock, some of the people, they said the rumblings that were within corporate was that the show's stale. The look is the dark arena with the gold ropes and just kind of having that whole kind of thought. I get what they're saying. It's also an indie look because that was the other thing that was kind of the uniqueness of the program, is because it did look so different from Raw and SmackDown. But most likely they're going to probably change that up because they want to go ahead and make it a lot brighter. Most likely. They're going to get rid of this dark black look to it. And they're going to add some light to it. They're going to add some brightness to it. That's what it looks like to me. We'll talk about what they're going to make their changes on, of what's being reported so far. Can't confirm it, but we can find out. So the ratings have not made a bump up. Because here's the other thing, too. They've had 4 months to try to build the ratings back up. And what happened was, instead of getting a bump up by being standalone, where if it was getting 800, 900,000 at its peak, well, now it's barely cracking 700,000. It took a step back, and now it's kind of building back up. But for the USA Network, I mean, I hate to say this, but when you look at things right now, the year-over-year ratings are going to be lower. Now, you want to blame the pandemic? Sure. But the pandemic, we all know, there wasn't much other sports to watch at that point. So what can you do? The average audience right now in 2021 for NXT is 675,000. If we look at 2020, it's 696,000. So there were almost 700,000 viewers on average, and the numbers dropped from the previous year. If I go and look back at 2019 and the ratings they had, NXT's ratings at the time were averaging 826,000. 3 straight years on USA Network. So you can't use the pandemic as the entire reference, but the ratings from 2019, from the initial debut of NXT to now, have dropped year over year. They can't. They decided, okay, if they wanted to try to go and put takeovers or try to put NXT events out on the road like they did before, they wouldn't make money. Lower ratings, lower attendance, lower box office. That affects everybody. And then the loss to AEW overall. For AEW, it's a victory lap. For what's happening to NXT, it's a message. It's, you could call it a punishment. But what it really is, NXT was starting to slip. The numbers the ratings don't lie, because that is the best indicator. And I don't know what the NXT attendance was leading up to or what it was doing beforehand, but the other thing was the talent they brought up. And regardless of what you think of what WWE did, bringing up certain stars, bringing them up generic, I can understand the thought process of why they would say, well, we don't want to use what NXT did. We don't want to use that format because that's an indie type entrance. It's an indie type feel. We're going to do something different for this star, but we need them to come out generic. And, hey, good job doing it in the minor leagues, kid. But you're coming up to the major leagues now, and you're going against a different roster. And so things are going to change. And there's going to be a humbling experience that comes along with this. It's what Vince McMahon wants. And are they panning out? Because here's the question. Has anybody really elevated out of the number of stars we have right now that were called up? Rhea Ripley, Bianca Belair. Have they increased their status? Have they really added something to the mix? I don't know if Rhea Ripley has. I think she hasn't made much of a difference since her call up. Bianca Belair, well, there is an upside to her. You just feel like there's something there why she's being used the way she is. So there's an it factor to her. I think everybody can see that, so go ahead with it. Riddle is becoming a sensation overnight. But there were stars that they brought on. I mean, remember the levels of stars they brought on board and were able to go and make changes to. I mean, you can talk about stars they made changes to as well, and they've turned out okay. Bayley's character, switching her from the huggable, ponytailed character with the wacky inflatable men to become this brooding, short-haired, bitchy character of a heel, and just doing amazing work. And then with Sasha Banks, they wanted to go with that boss coming in. They said, you know what? We're going to elevate it. And they did. And Sasha Banks has just excelled. But that was because, look, you're talking about some great matches they had that are still talked about today when it comes to Bayley versus Sasha, or Sasha versus Charlotte, or, Sasha versus Becky, or Charlotte versus Becky, or whatever you want. Becky Lynch moving up from NXT absolutely has made a big difference for herself. Charlotte the same way. They all did. Moving Bray Wyatt up to the main roster ultimately did make a big difference. The Shield overnight sensation. Like, to take that, the uniqueness of the organic uniqueness of all those characters and bringing them to the main roster overnight. What WWE wants is those kind of stars. They want the level of stars that come out that really became something big. They should have done right by the Shield versus Wyatt family, but they didn't. But man, they could have done something right by it. But there were so many stars they brought up that were just hitting it all over the park. And they've been the new generation of our stars that we love right now today. Or maybe you don't. You might have a little bit of indifference, but whatever. But it did happen. And those stars in NXT, for all the women, about Asuka they brought up, and then just saying, and Paige we won't talk about enough, who was amazing in NXT. And saying ourselves, does Rhea Ripley or Bianca Belair, how much do they really compare to Sasha, Bayley, Becky, Charlotte? I think Alexa Bliss has done pretty well to put herself on the map. Asuka's done extremely well to put herself on the map. I think Kairi Sane did a pretty good job for herself. So imagine that. And you look at the other side, and they're still able to make things with some of the stars they have. They have mainstays right now from NXT with Shinsuke Nakamura and Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn and Finn Balor. It's a whole lot right there. So ultimately, you have some great talent that did come from NXT, but they're not getting that kind of turnout of talent now. Can those type of stars, or Roderick Strong? I mean, do we see a similar turnout of talent? Are we going to see that from Diamond Mine or Hit Row? Are we going to see that come from Raquel Gonzalez or Dakota Kai? You got to ask yourself that question. And that's why NXT is being changed. Ultimately, this is why it's being changed. It's not fun to talk about, but what I will say, and I've been saying this for years, is that NXT, regardless of what brings us, what they always do consistently, it is good wrestling 90 to 95% of the time. Consistently good wrestling. And a lot of great takeover shows. It's not must-see TV like it was before. And yes, you know what? We got to give a lot of credit to Mauro Ranallo and Tom Phillips before him offered a lot to what they were doing. And we also got to bring up Renee Young. I got to bring up William Regal on their commentary. And Nigel McGuinness we got to bring up. Like, there was a time where they were kicking on all cylinders. Great commentary. The action was great. We were seeing a lot of fresh things going on as well. It's just not like that now. NXT overall is taking a step down. And I didn't mind NXT turning into what it was now, this real, another indie promotion polished by WWE by basically saying, hey, we can do the indie stuff that all you guys can do, and we can do it better. Okay. We could do a system that as a smaller promotion, and we could be successful at it. Well, yeah, they did it. But that doesn't mean anything for the bottom line. What WWE really needs, whether you like it or you don't like it, they need an NXT that was just like it was 2012, 2013, 2014. They need that NXT back. And I believe what they're going to do now is try to bring that level of NXT back, but they're going to put a new coat of paint on it. They're going to reformat it. It's going to be back to rebuilding. So we might have some stars that are going to be green, but we're going to get some new stars. And there won't be new stars that are coming from other organizations that have already have 5, 10, 15 years of experience. Because the other thing that we got to talk about as well is the opportunity to go ahead and shape and mold a wrestler into the WWE style and be in the system from the beginning. So that they have, so that where the company has already invested all the interest because they're the ones that brought them in. And so something of their accord that they chose to bring on board, any indie stars that come in that are veterans are unfortunately expendable. And that's what happened with these 13 stars that were let go. But when they had Tyler Dalton, before that was Mike, were just very initially into the run. And when they were being trained, really it would be that WWE actually ultimately trained them. The Performance Center trained them. But all these other people they had, these 13 stars, most likely were not trained initially by the Performance Center. Where they were completely, from the beginning, where they first started lacing up their boots, they were learning the WWE system, the NXT system, the Performance Center system. All these stars right here don't have that. And I hate to say it, but Adam Cole, Tommaso Ciampa, Bobby Fish, Kyle O'Reilly, Johnny Gargano, they were not raised that way. And there are only so many stars of their size and stature that can be moved over to the main roster. AJ Styles, Daniel Bryan, those are examples. But just like in that company, there's only room for like one big guy or a couple of big guys, and there's only room for a couple of small guys. When they're not the normal, prototypical, big, bulky guys that Vince likes. Because if they're short of 6'2", 250, 260, then they're just looking to be inferior. And we don't want just good, solid wrestlers. I mean, there was never a time where the company had, 10 Shawn Michaels in the roster. They don't have it. Or Shawn Michael wannabes. They don't have that. So they made this change. That's how they're going to do it. I hope I made my case. I don't know what else to tell you, but that's where I see things going. So there's been a lot of rumors that are being discussed. WrestleNomics Brandon Thurston had the comic book revealed back in June that many of the WWE investors were under the impression that McMahon would be selling the company. Said he talked with 5 people in the investor community in the last 24 hours about the notion that the company's recent actions indicate they're preparing for a sale. Not one of them thought so. So the rumors have come along of a planned sale. No. But then we already knew that PW Insider had already talked about how the releases are more so related to a planned overhaul of the NXT brand as a whole. And PW Insider noted on their audio show this week that there has been talk of major changes for the NXT brand, a new logo, new lighting, focus on younger talent, along with a different format to the show. The house cleaning appears to be changes for the brand. News.co would add that officials in the company realize the brand has gotten stale and the look of the feel of the show needs to change. You're not going to like this answer, but I agree with them. I think it's stale, the look and feel of the show. It is stale. The whole Capitol Wrestling Center, a different look, but it's still the NXT arena, still full show to some degree, but not even good as it was. And I don't think it would make much of a difference if you took the plexiglass off and the people were to know have masks on or whatever. So there's that part to consider. Let's take some of the stories that have gone on out there. WrestlingNews.co also reporting that talent releases are going to be a regular occurrence. So let's take this story. This is most recently, I saw this today. Andrew Ravens reporting that. And let's go ahead and just remember who they've let go this year. Main roster, you had Samoa Joe, Iconics, Mickie James, Chelsea Green, and others. And then you had Braun Strowman, Aleister Black, Ruby Riott, Fandango, Lana, Tyler Breeze, and Tony Nese, Bray Wyatt, and then the 12th talent we had Friday. And Frightful Select spoke with the official about the cuts and expressed extreme frustration and explained the line of thinking from the corporate side. The person stated Vince McMahon can personally put a stop to any of these and calls the cuts a collaborative effort. Nick Khan. So Vince isn't saying anything about stopping it, which is there it is. He could put a stop to all this. But he's been sold that the change to NXT needs to be made. Nobody's going to like this answer, but I agree with him. The change to NXT. What I don't like is all these stars are going to be left out in the street. On the beach, we would call on a radio. It's a lot of great talent. But I, as always, have said that you do not have to, the WWE is not the end-all be-all. Even before AEW came to light. What did I say about AJ Styles, Alberto Rio, and others, and Cody Rhodes? That they were all able to go and make themselves money and work and flourish in other organizations. And they did. And there is no doubt in my mind that right now wrestling is such a good spot where you could see a lot of this talent. I don't know if they'll go to AEW. I don't see these 12 or 13 stars that just got released. I mean, Bronson Reed, you could see them being tried out maybe. I don't know. But there's still a number of stars we haven't seen land anywhere yet. Ring of Honor. If there's anything they need to do right now, they could absolutely go and take some of this talent. Like, I don't get why they haven't taken advantage of some of these releases. They are the company, they're at the most need of some. I mean, they're not going to get rid of some of the talent they have. You know, they're not going to get rid of the Briscoes or Jay Lethal. Rush and Bandito are going to be there for a while. Dragon Lead as well. And they do have quite a few older stars. And they could definitely use some talent that with some familiarity from other organizations. I think it would help them. Take some of these stars that have gotten some exposure some other place, much like the other organizations have. Impact, AEW, NWA have all done the same thing, but Ring of Honor has not. But they should. The only person I could think of that was really significant that they brought on board was, Mike Bennett and Maria Kanellis Bennett? But nobody else has been brought over. And it's not as if Ring of Honor couldn't take advantage of this right now. But they could. Like, Ring of Honor should look at a Bronson Reed. Ring of Honor already had Mercedes Martinez for a short while. They should welcome her back, especially with that women's tournament coming up. And Ring of Honor has also been known to take some of their stars that might not be overly sized. Well, I don't know if they'll take on some of the stars they have here, but the other thing too, the other organization I think that will probably keep an eye on some of these people, if not, Court Bauer will look at them for MLW because now he's launching Azteca Underground. I don't know if they're going to include, if the Lucha Underground format's coming back here, and they might do something with this, but MLW is going to have some stars, they're, like the La Parcas of the world, and, the Mexican luchadors that they've had on their roster are going to be moving over to that, most likely. I don't know if they'll cross over, but MLW could look at some stars here and give them a tryout or give them a chance to come on board. So there's organizations here. Impact Wrestling's taking quite a few stars. I don't have to see if they have room for anybody else that they could over here, but they've been absolutely able to go and take some talent that they've wanted. But I think if anybody's going to look at some of these stars that have just been released, why doesn't Ring of Honor look? And then after that, the indies. A lot of indies will be looking at what they're going to be doing. Who knows if PWG or GCW or, Pick'em might look at things right now with some of the stars that have been let go. Fightful Select also learned that the releases are going to be a regular occurrence going forward, but stated they personally expect 2021 to be an outlier with both the frequency and level of talent. So I guess maybe they'll go ahead and have another set of releases that come out sometime before the end of the year, but they've put out so many right now. And then you see the stars they have right now on the main roster that they don't decide to go and bring any of their stars on. They usually just have the same crop of stars that are working with each other and rotated for a program with each other, whether it's the Mysterios and the Usos, whether it's Roman Reigns and John Cena, or whether it's Finn Balor now with Baron Corbin or, Pick'em, whether it's Edge and Seth Rollins, whether it's Bianca Belair and Sasha Banks with a little bit of taste of Zelina Vega being brought into the mix. I mean, you see the same dancing partners together. I say it about the company all the time. So they're keeping on doing that. But the company doesn't really believe in taking some stars in between. And, if you're building up a storyline, well, let's get a little couple of glorified squash matches in there. And then you continue to do the storyline where you don't have to have the wrestlers together in some other version of a match, doing a championship contenders match or doing another match just to do a match. Every week. You could do something else. Could be a little more creativity, a little more forethought. Just, maybe just change things up a little bit. But the formatics of creative have not changed yet for whatever reason. Cage Side Seats also talked about the company strategy. Let's talk about that. Stories from Sean Reuter at Cage Side Seats. He says that the immediate impact of reducing the amount of money the company spends on labor is to the bottom line. Emphasis on maximizing profits has led that the company could be for sale, but, nothing like that. At the 2018 Business Partner Summit, interesting how he put this out, Paul Triple H Levesque laid out his plan for a global territory system. Regional performance centers would train and polish local talent, working with a roster of wrestlers that the company would sign from all over. NXT UK was the first such territory. Then the game had eyes on Japan, India, and other growth markets. Then AEW came along. But then AEW shifted NXT's focus from global domination to being a weekly 2-hour live TV show, snuffing out Dynamite before it even had a chance to grow big enough to think about competing with anybody else. Good way to phrase it. That's true. So here we are. It's probably frustrating for Levesque and his team, and it sucks for the men and women who thought they were going to be at the company but are back out hustling for bookings. It makes sense from a business perspective. Sean agrees with me. A lot of this has been part of the discussion amongst wrestlers and fans for a while now, but it's also been backed up by a high-level WWE official. And there's plenty of issues with the talent shedding strategy that the company seems committed to. What message it sends to fans and partners when performers who were just being featured on TV and major event programs are suddenly deemed expendable. The company's clearly moved away from a vision that requires having hundreds of wrestlers under contract, though, so more nights like last night are probably ahead. Yeah, they're not going to hold on to a big stack of talent and just put people under contracts just to have them. The thought that we're going to have all these different people under contract, if they're not being used, they're going to probably be smarter about their contracts now. Now, it still doesn't make a difference yet. There's no unionization. These wrestlers are independent contractors, and so they're susceptible, no matter what, to lose their job. It sucks. But that's where they are. Now, with the rebuilding of NXT, there's still going to have to be some stars that stay around. I don't know what the deal is going to be when it comes to, we already know with Adam Cole, we have a contract issue where is he going to be coming back or not? And we don't know what's going to happen to him yet. There's not much that we said about who is under contract still with NXT. Don't know yet. But there was talk about how Adam Cole was slated to have a meeting with Vince McMahon at the SmackDown TV event on Friday night. Fightful Select reported that the meeting took place a few hours before SmackDown in McMahon's office. Those in the company considered it to be high priority to McMahon himself. Higher up said the meeting went well, with McMahon appearing to like Cole on a personal level. People backstage in the event noted Cole was not around during the show. Originally, the company wanted to bring in Cole the Friday before in Minnesota, but switched it to Florida due to logistical reasons. And there have been pitches for Cole to be both on Raw or SmackDown over the last week, but it depends on whether he signs a new contract. And I think some of the stars they've had on top for a long time, Ciampa, O'Reilly, Gargano, I don't know if all those four stay around as a nucleus that stays around for the younger crop of stars that come in. Because I feel like they're going to have some veteran talent come over to stay on board to kind of help mentor the new talent. So all these guys will be considered veterans that can help get the next crop of talent over to be called up to the main roster. But overall, NXT is about to be brought back to where it was before as a proper developmental territory, which is what I was asking for a long time, to keep that in place. Because most importantly, regardless of how I like NXT TakeOver shows and how I can go and comment about the shows, but for the last couple of years, I've been consistent in saying that NXT, they need to make sure it was going to be a place for developmental talent, for the next talent to come up to the main roster, because the main roster needs help. Now, they have been taking some talent, and they have brought them up. Has it been enough? Yes, the company has their shortcomings when it comes to taking certain stars, bringing them up, but when it's not their talent, they're only going to give them a half-ass effort to get a chance to get over, and when they don't, they cut them. So they're going to go back to having stars that they are able to make on their own. Homegrown talent. That's how NXT worked best in 2012, 2013, 2014. I think that's where they're going to go back to. It's going to come in rebuilt once again. And I think in a couple of years, it's actually going to do better for the overall product on the main roster. But it will take a couple of years to build that up. But I think this is a smart move. Business move, yes. It doesn't mean I don't like what they're doing, but they're going to rebuild. It's just like a team that, might have won the Super Bowl a couple of times. When the team loses talent, they're not getting people to go and watch the games, and they're not making money on merchandise, and things are starting to fall down. You have to rebuild. For a long time, it was NXT wasn't going to rebuild. They were going to reload. Well, it didn't work anymore. There is nobody that's out there in free agency that would make a significant difference right now. That would go to NXT anyway. So they're going to rebuild. Let's see what they do. I'll leave it there. I hope you appreciate this special edition of the Wrestling Is Real podcast. I'll be back on Wednesday. And until then, come back for another Wrestling Is Real podcast because wrestling needs us. Thank you for listening to the Wrestling Is Real podcast. You can find all previous episodes at WrestlingIsReal.com or subscribe to the show on all major podcast outlets, including Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Follow the King of Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at King of Podcasts, and search King of Podcasts on YouTube, or type youtube.com/JBRASCO951. This has been a presentation of the King of Podcasts Radio Network.